right, let's dive into the story of one of the most fearsome, most legendary generals of the entire Three Kingdoms period, Xiahou Dun. His life is just an absolute masterclass in loyalty and resilience, and it's defined by a moment on the battlefield so extreme you'd swear it was pure fiction. But it wasn't. Let's get into it.
You know, when we look back through military history, we see these figures who just rise above everyone else. But what really forges a legend? What's the secret ingredient? Is it just about winning battles? Is it just raw strength? Or is it something deeper, something forged in these incredible moments of sacrifice, of unbreakable will, and maybe even in the wisdom that only comes from failure? We're going to explore all of that through the life of this one incredible man.
So who was Xiahou Dun, really? Well, long before he was a famous general, he was defined by one single core principle: absolute, unwavering, fierce loyalty. And this wasn't just some professional code of conduct, it was practically coded into his DNA right from the very beginning.
Now, have a look at this. It almost reads like a modern military dossier, doesn't it? He came from a line of famous Han Dynasty generals, so service was in his blood. And notice his personality, fierce and brave, yeah, but also humble and respectful. That's a rare combination, especially back then. For weapons, he favored the long spear, for reach and keeping enemies at bay, and then the heavy saber for when things got up close and personal. But the most important thing on this entire slide, the absolute key, is his status. He wasn't just a general for the warlord Cao Cao. He was family, a childhood friend, and his most trusted commander, period. That bond was the absolute bedrock of his entire career.
And its loyalty, it wasn't just talk. It had real and frankly brutal consequences. Get this, as a teenager, just 14 years old, some guy publicly insults his teacher. Xiahou Dun doesn't just get into a shouting match. No, he hunts the man down and kills him. It's a shocking act for sure, but it set the pattern for his entire life. An attack on someone he respected was a direct attack on him, and he would answer it with nothing less than overwhelming force.
And now we come to the moment, the one that made him a legend. You know, winning battles makes a general famous, but what Xiahou Dun did next, this made him immortal. This is one of those acts of pure, raw defiance that just transcends the battlefield and goes straight into the realm of myth.
Okay, so picture the scene. It's the Battle of Puyang, absolute chaos. The air is thick with dust, shouting, the clang of steel on steel. Xiahou Dun is where he always is, right on the front lines, leading the charge against the forces of the rival warlord, the notoriously tough Liu Bei. And right in the middle of this swirling melee, a stray arrow finds its mark. It hits him, directly in the left eye.
Not for literally any other person on that field. This is it. It's over. You're done. But not for Xiahou Dun. He doesn't scream, he doesn't fall back, no. Instead, he reaches up, grips the shaft of the arrow, and rips it out, pulling his own eyeball clean out of the socket with it. He looks down at the eye in his hand and declares, "Essence of my father, blood of my mother, it cannot be discarded." And then he swallows it.
Just think about the psychological impact of that. His own men are stunned silent for a second, and then they're filled with this unbelievable surge of morale. I mean, how could you possibly fear anything when your general just did that? And his enemies? They were utterly terrified. This wasn't a man anymore. He was a demon on the battlefield. From that day forward, he was known as Blind Xiahou, and his reputation as an unstoppable force of will was forever locked in. He then charged, his face a mask of blood, right back into the fight and drove the enemy back. Incredible.
Now, an act like that could easily define a man's entire legacy. But what makes Xiahou Dun's story so much more interesting is that some of his greatest contributions might have come far, far away from any battlefield.
Just look at this comparison. It shows two completely different people, right? On one side, you've got the warrior we all know, the guy who inspires fear and awe. But on the other side, you have the administrator, who is just as important. He was an absolute expert in logistics, managing the critical supply lines that kept Cao Cao's armies moving and fed during these long, grueling campaigns. While other generals were fighting for glory on the front, Xiahou Dun was making sure the entire war machine could actually function. He didn't just defeat enemies on the field, he built up communities behind it.
And here's the perfect example. The region he was governing was hit by a devastating famine. It was on the brink of total collapse. Did he just wait for aid? Nope. He rolled up his sleeves. He personally led his soldiers, not into battle, but into a massive construction project. They built a dam, they dug irrigation canals, and he saved the entire population from starvation. It was pure leadership.
The people started calling him a father and mother official because he literally cared for them like they were his own children. But no great commander's story is complete without failure. In fact, it's often in our greatest defeats that our true character really comes to the surface. And for Xiahou Dun, that moment of truth came at the Battle of Bowangpo.
By this point, his reputation was massive. He was Blind Xiahou, the unstoppable warrior. And maybe, just maybe, it made him arrogant. He was leading this huge army, 100,000 men, and he started chasing what looked like a retreating enemy force right into a narrow pass. His own officers warned him, "Sir, this feels like a trap." He ignored them, totally convinced of an easy victory. Well, it was a trap, a brilliant one, set by the master strategist Zhuge Liang. Fire erupted from all sides. His army was completely decimated.
So he returns to Cao Cao utterly humiliated. He could have made excuses, right? He could have blamed his scouts, bad intelligence, the terrain, anything. Instead, he simply bowed and took full, complete responsibility. His words, "The defeat is my fault alone." That showed a kind of strength, a kind of leadership that no battlefield victory ever could. He protected his men even in his own failure.
That failure was his crucible. All that arrogance was just burned away, and it was replaced by a hard-won wisdom. He learned caution, he learned the importance of listening to his subordinates, and he learned the hard limits of just using brute force. The disaster at Bowangpo didn't break him, it actually completed him. It made him a better, wiser commander.
So let's bring all these pieces together. We have the warrior, the administrator, the leader who learned from his own crushing mistakes. What does that all add up to? What was his ultimate legacy in the state of Wei that he helped build from the ground up?
Well, you can really say his legacy stands on 4 huge pillars. Militarily, he rose to become the supreme commander of all armies. Politically, he was a calm, trusted, stabilizing force in the court. Spiritually, he was the absolute gold standard of loyalty and integrity. And even on a personal level, he was the respected head of his entire clan. He wasn't just a one-trick pony, he was a complete leader who contributed to every single facet of the new nation.
And all of this culminates in his final, and I think most telling, title. Yeah, he was made Grand Marshal, the highest military honor you could get, but history remembers him as the pillar stone of the state of Wei. Now think about that. Not the sharpest sword, not the fiercest tiger, but the pillar, the foundational, unshakable support that the entire building rests on. His greatest value in the end wasn't just his ferocity, but his absolute rock-solid reliability.
Which brings us right back to that question from the beginning. Xiahou Dun's life seems to suggest that a true legend isn't just about those shocking moments of bravery, like swallowing your own eye. It's about having both sides of the coin, the ability to lead in peace as well as war, and maybe most importantly, having the strength of character to own your failures and come back wiser. That is what forges a pillar of a nation.